So this morning I just want to look at two things. Just checking the time. The first will relate to how we read Romans 2. As you know, we've been going through Romans, and I've been given the second half of chapter 2. And then another part I just want to look at is just unpacking what religion is compared to the gospel. And I just trust there will be some fresh perspectives that will encourage you. And as we've heard other weeks, Paul progressively stacks his arguments and thoughts, and he takes the readers to a conclusion. So it doesn't end in chapter 1, it doesn't end in chapter 2, but together the parts add up to his message. And so I thought, because I often like to do this, when I think, oh my gosh, there's so much in the Bible, I just sometimes go to the end of the letters, the end of the books, just to see where the writer ended, just so that I get the conclusion. You know, when you want to cheat and then you can backtrack. Actually, I used to be a maths teacher, and that's what I do in algebra. I'd go to the answer and work out backwards what x must have been. So anyway, so here we have. So the end of Romans has this. Now to him who is able to strengthen you according to my gospel, Paul says, and the proclamation of Jesus Christ, according to the revelation of the mystery that has been kept secret for long ages, but now is disclosed through the prophetic scriptures and has been made known to all the nations according to the command of the eternal God, to bring about the obedience of faith to the only wise God through Jesus Christ be glory forever. Amen. So, after listening to the letter of Romans be read out, the people end up knowing a few things, that this God is able to strengthen and establish them. That Paul's gospel was one that he experienced and he understood through the Old Testament, and that this mystery brings about obedience of faith, and this mystery keeps them in the life of God. And that the command of God shows that this was God's desire, this was his longing. It was what that he wanted to have happen, and he commands it, and he wanted to be known well. So, coming back to chapter 2, second part, it's a bit like an entree. Chapter 2, along with all the other bits in the early chapters of Romans, to the main meal, probably chapter 8, and then you've got some dessert in the rest of the book of Romans. So, just looking at part of today's reading, and he's addressing the Jews, and he says, now, if you call yourself a Jew, if you rely on the law and boast in God, if you know his will and approve what is superior because you're instructed by the law, if you are convinced that you are a guide for the blind, a light for those who are in the dark, or an instructor of the foolish, a teacher of little children, because you have in the law the embodiment of knowledge and truth, you then who teach others, do you not teach yourself? And it goes on, you who preach against stealing, do you steal? You who say that people should not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? And you who abhor or hate idols, do you rob temples? Which is a real no-no in those days, really frowned upon. But it happened. And you who boast in the law, do you dishonour God by breaking the law? As it is written, verse 24, God's name is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. Okay, so the Jewish Christians looked to the law, but their actions didn't match their confession. All right, a bit of a no-brainer. It was hypocrisy. They said one thing and did another. And in turn, God's character was really not represented well. He was discredited. And we can see that today. We know it in our own lives. Anyway, he doesn't stop there. It was understood that if you had the law, that meant that you loved Yahweh. But their hearts were far from him, and as Kathy explained last week, there were many times that Jesus pointed out that very discrepancy. You say this, but your hearts don't know God, don't know me. But one thing we have to remember, when Paul spoke, he in public and when he taught, he always, I just could imagine this huge vat, he always brought this huge backstory with him. But today we're not used to that because we're largely literate, we can read, we can see what it means. Oh, that's what the text is meaning, exactly what it means. But for Paul, And for his listeners, he would throw a word, he'd throw a phrase and a suggestion, and it would have immense implications for their history and for their writings. They had an amazing oral tradition. They would talk and sing their stories of their people, especially the Exodus was a major one, through all the generations. So this is what Paul's referring to back in 24, verse 24, as it is written. And he says, God's name is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. The Jewish leaders and others knew that this was a reference to Isaiah. I didn't. I have to go to commentaries to see where they came from, don't we all? But it really does help to understand what Paul in his letter was referring to. So let's go to that verse in Isaiah. And now, what do I have here, declares the Lord? For my people have been taken away for nothing, they were in exile. And those who rule them mock, declares the Lord. And all day long, my name is constantly blasphemed. So Paul was referring to the same accusation. That is, God's reputation had been dirtied, either by Israel's sins or by the wrongful actions of other nations. But as Paul knew, there was more. Reading further into chapter 52, therefore, my people will know my name. Therefore, in that day, they will know it is I who foretold it. Yes, it is I. And then verse 7, which we know, how beautiful on the mountains are the feet of those who bring good news, who proclaim peace, who bring good tidings, who proclaim salvation, who says to Zion, your God reigns. Paul knew that this was God's intention to bring his salvation. It will be good news for Israel. But wait, it's not just the knife set, there is more. So, moving on, if we keep reading, Isaiah 52, 9 and 10. For the Lord has comforted his people. He has redeemed Jerusalem. The Lord will lay bare his holy arm in the sight of all the nations, and all the ends of the earth will see the salvation of our God. This is what Paul knew God was up to. Even the nations would be affected by this salvation. So what Paul was doing for those Jewish listeners, and there were Gentiles too, Gentile Christians, he was reframing what they had learnt through those prophetic scriptures that we mentioned to help them join the dots. He was going like, this is that. This Jesus whom you crucified, he's actually the suffering servant who, as we read in Isaiah 53, was pierced for our transgressions. And in Isaiah 54, actually all of Isaiah from about Isaiah 40 upwards is all messianic. It's all about the gospel. And it starts off, I just love it, Isaiah 40 verse 1, comfort, comfort my people. But that's the landing place for God's heart to bring his salvation. And so in Isaiah 54, God will have compassion on his people. And then we get to Isaiah, and bring peace, of course. And then we get to Isaiah 60, arise, shine, for your light has come. And that's Jesus' declaration. So, looking at this salvation that Paul refers to, it was hidden in his reference as it is written. But of course he goes on to develop what this salvation looks like. It meant wholeness, not just for individuals, because we often think, it's all about me, I get my sins forgiven and I go to heaven. It's bigger and better than that. That's part of it, but there's more. Always more. Where have I got? Yeah. And so it was also known, this salvation was also called the Great Consolation. And Messianic rabbis, they're just rabbis who believe in Jesus, they actually called Jesus the Comforter, the Consoler. The great consolation was going to come, and the earth and the nations would be comforted. They would be consoled. Their burdens would be taken off and they would be given ways of peace to walk in. Their burdens would be lightened. It was good news for everyone. And this is Paul's gospel. It's just interesting. I had never noticed that he said, this is my gospel. And then I was reading something else and this is my gospel. I'm telling you this. And so this was Paul's gospel that he's presenting in Romans. And just as I said, justification in Romans was not just about sinners being put right with God and going to heaven. And actually there's no mention of heaven in that sense anywhere in Romans. We've got personal reconciliation. But Paul is heading to Romans 8, where the whole of creation is renewed. God wants to put the whole world right, including little c. God was determined to deal with anything that ravaged people. He dealt with sin because of his love for people. Paul knew that God wanted to work through us. We're the image bearers, bringing his rule and his ways of being and doing life. And all the nations will be comforted and they will be impacted. Our homes and businesses will be comforted and impacted. Whittlesea will be comforted and impacted. That's part of the heart of where this church is going to, and why we have a vision for a community centre that will show what God's like in the heart, as our motto says. All our interactions with others will demonstrate, well, this is the God, this is the space where we live, and our hearts matter to him. And so we go back to the last part of our little section of reading. We read, no person is a Jew who is one inwardly, and circumcision is circumcision of the heart, by the Spirit, not by the written code. And such a person's praise is not from other people, but from God. So the covenant God has with people is inward. It involves the heart. It's enacted by the Spirit, as we've been singing this morning. It's not the written code. God sees and he commends, not others. And I know the heart, even biblically, the heart is actually quite a vague term. But I found it's just helpful that our heart is actually the real me. So your heart is just the real you. It's not what we think or adhere to in here, because your thinking can change. You can change your opinion tomorrow. And it's not what you feel, because your emotions can change hourly. And it's not what you determine. It's not your will, because some days we can be quite passive and other days we're full of this. But if we can just consider the heart being the real you, and what religion, which the Jews, Paul was setting up, that their adherence to the written code, the law, was a form of religion. It didn't have the power to change their lives. And religion tries to convince this heart, it tries to convince the real you of other things, but it certainly doesn't bring you rest. And as I think, just even Matt, with what he's sharing with his friend, you know, the fact you don't have to do anything else, because often religion will bring contentment because you haven't done enough, you haven't obeyed that. It's like it hooks up with, are you good enough? Is it enough? Is it enough? What is enough? And you're in this space with religion that doesn't give you peace. So just very briefly now, religion is man reaching to God, where humans initiate the action. It's an outward form which shapes one's inward. The external qualifies us. If I do this, this and this, if I listen to that, if I do that, then I'm qualified. So that's a religious way of doing it. We have the law, the Jews would say. We keep the rules. We could say we have the choir, we have the best methods, I know the Bible, but they're all just a way of having confidence in the flesh. And that was the problem. And Paul was redirecting him to say, it isn't by this stuff, it isn't by what I can do and I can achieve, as he said in his own, in terms of his own life, but it's by what God can do in me. And even when we have our baptism and communion, we always explain that this is just a reflection of what's happening inside. Baptism and communion don't save us, those acts in themselves, but it reflects what is happening inside. And this religion has to be maintained by self-determination, by habits, and it can be blatant or subtle, Even for us, we've just got to be careful what we put on ourselves and put on others. I will be faithful. I will read this. I will do that. I will claim that verse. We need to be careful. And religion actually is what I call darkened thinking, as we even sang this morning. In Ezekiel, there's a section where it talks about Satan and his claims. I will ascend. I will be like the Most High. But actually, because he rejected being in God's presence and the Father's presence, that is what we can describe as being an orphan way of thinking, because Satan was actually the first orphan. He refused to be fathered by God. And so the ways of the world, the ways of the enemy are orphan ways. They're manipulative, they rob you, they are destructive, and they're power hungry. And we and that's part of discernment, to know what's feeding this thing, what's feeding that, because Satan just didn't want to yield to God supplying all his needs. Now, just thinking, it can be very, very subtle, this thing. There was a period in my life, and you might have come across, I was mingling with some Christians, this is a few years back, and they were all into the Messianic movement, and so there was this, I felt, this is me, it's nothing about the movement, it's what was happening in my heart. I felt that to be a truer believer, I really needed to understand and even have Shabbat on a Friday night. I needed to know what lighting the candles represented. I needed to know, oh, that's the Day of Atonement. And that means, I didn't know, but I felt I had to. And I even bought a Jewish Bible, which I do love. But it was just this pressure that I had to be really a better Christian. This is what it could look like. And I was just so relieved. One day I was reading, I think I've forgotten which letter it was, but it just talked about Jews and Gentiles. And I got this light bulb. I'm actually a Gentile. I don't have to become Jewish in order to be, a better Christian, to have my faith and my relationship with God improved. And so it was really subtle. And I just hope you don't feel, and I know Rowan's heart and the leadership's heart is never to put things on you, that there is a freedom in this gospel, that just be careful what even you put on yourself. Not good. And just very briefly, I'm coming to the end now, but I did, someone rang out of the blue a while back, years ago, a lady said, I need to talk to you about the Father. And it turned out she belonged to a cult, a Christian cult in Melbourne. And the thing about cults, as I listened to her, was that they had demands on them, put on them, that this is, you've got to give your money to this is how you spend your time, this is how you relate to your leaders. And it was huge. It actually, very destructive. It cost them thousands and thousands. It cost them family relationships. And it's just was here in Melbourne. And yes, she's come out and she's seen differently. But there is a demand. If I hear the word should too much, I start to twitch because I just sense, don't go don't. Or even when I read something, it's not necessarily people, but when I read things, even Christian articles, oh my gosh, there's so much around to read. Just know who you are before God, and be able to just click. Don't be told that you must. That's a driven, a compulsion. But with God, as we look at now Christianity, there's an invitation. Okay, so looking at the next slide, we have Christianity. It also operates between man and God like religion, but God reaches downward towards us. He is the initiator. He brings an inward reality which deeply affects our outward life. Humans are unable to keep the law, but God created a new covenant, a way for us to keep his ways. And we are kept by God. We're not alone. We don't have to be self-determinate people. We have to do it by ourselves. The big Aussie thing, I will get it, I will do it my way. No. We're actually kept by God. We can relax somewhere. And it says, Jesus said, I will not leave you orphans. And my Father and I, we're going to come and make our home with you. And in that place there is no condemnation. No condemnation. It's a place where you can go and tuck in. So, finally, another thing that Paul knew in this little section of chapter 2 is that God will do it. Circumcision, Paul knew that the Lord had promised back in Deuteronomy that the Lord your God will circumcise your hearts and the hearts of your descendants so that you may love him with all your heart and with all your soul and live. Circumcision was a critical sign of commitment to keeping the law for the Jewish people. It was paramount, but to be circumcised in our hearts means that we are not stiff-necked. That was the meaning, even in the Old Testament. Oh, you stiff-necked people, you need to circumcise your hearts. But as people who have their hearts circumcised, as we're teachable, we're responsible, a bit floppy like a rat. No, not quite. We receive from God. We're happy to receive. We're open-hearted. We're hopefully not too naive because we need wisdom. But we're open. We yield to each other. We listen. It's like, I'm not demanding that you have to believe me. You're not demanding that I have to believe you. Let's just share what it is that we think the Spirit is doing. We offer our hearts to each other. We sense where peace is. Now that's a big thing in terms of direction. God doesn't necessarily say, take this, take this step, and then you'll be where I want you to be. We have options in our life, but the peace within is part of this covenant, the way that we're kept with God. Have you got peace about it? Even in terms of our timing in our conversations, do I say this? Kathy, I'm looking at Kathy because we've had some good heart. Do I say this now or just keep it till later? This is circumcision of the heart. There's a life that happens when our hearts are open to his life. So much to be said about that. Anyway, just want to end up with this story. Actually, just a while ago now. Oh my gosh. Excuse me. I was with a lot of young adults, lovely young adults, and there was a prayer time, and it was praying to the nations. And I heard them say, oh God, I want to go wherever you send me. I will go to the ends of the earth. Oh God, I want to do what you want me to do. I want to have your heart. And it was intense. And I was older and a little bit more vulnerable, I think, trying to find my way still. But I saw, and this doesn't happen that often, but you will know when God actually comes in and says something, it's actually really effective. He doesn't have to say a lot, he doesn't have to say it often, but it will be effective. And so I saw this hand come down. It was like he was taking a sand timer, and he flipped it. And it was as if he's saying, all these prayers, I will do this, I will follow you wherever you go, wherever you want me to. And I just had the sense he was flipping the time, and he says, oh, my people, I just want to come to where you are. My heart is to come to where you are. Let's do life where you are. I want to find you where you are. And it's like this pressure that we have to go was just chopped. That he will come to us. It's always his initiative. And so just finally then, we, if you like, us lovely humans, are the object of his Christianity. He wants to come to us. And if you take the song away and if you take the sand timer away, that's where we're bookending today's service. And just to relax that he can find you. He can find you. Open your hearts and just to rest in who he is and what he has done and what he's always wanted to do for you. So, bless you, Father. Oh, Father, I just thank you that you can take away all that energy of what we think we have to do to be a Christian, even. And a lot of it's just what we, box up inside our own heads. It's not because of other people doing things, not necessarily. So, Father, I just ask that the refreshment that we are downstream of your love. Jesus was downstream of your love, Father. That we want to position ourselves with Jesus and be downstream. That the initiative comes from you. It grows in our belly, it grows in our heart, and out of that life we speak and we live. And we trust that your life will go out to the communities, to the neighbourhoods, to our people that we're on holiday with, to the greengrocer, to whatever. That, Father, can we give a gospel that says that people, you are enough, your heart matters, and that God wants to come and just tabernacle. It talks about dwelling with us, pitching a tent, thinking of camps, pitching a tent. You pitch a tent over us. And in the same way, you just want to pitch a tent over our neighbours, over our workmates, over our colleagues, and of course pitch a tent over the children and the young people. This is your place, this is your world, Father. So we just want to release and open up more to this downflow of your love, to see what you see and relax in it. Amen.
If you are new to the church or visiting for the very first time, can I encourage you to fill in one of the welcome cards that you received as you came in this morning? Remember, if ever you miss one of our messages or services, you can always catch up by going to our website. There's a link there to our YouTube channel, and there you'll find all our recent messages, which will also include church news.
Upcoming services. On Sunday the 9th of March, we'll have our service of celebration again. This will include Rev Kids program, speaker Pastor Rowan Bias.